Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
To watch the national and international, big names parachute in, as you said, it ratcheted it up to another level that I hadn't experienced at that level. And the difference was, they had resources that we couldn't even dream about. And there were things being done that were really shocking to us in terms of getting witnesses and whatnot. What the aftermath was, is we were left there. Like when 2 weeks later, when it died down for real, we were the ones left. And there was a lot of anger and retribution that was still happening, and we were it. So the local media was there on the ground for the next year, or forever.
This is Small Press, Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewertz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Frank Scandale. He's the news director for the Asbury Park Press in New Jersey. And he's been all around the country for decades, really. Local media organizations. We had a call last week that was real great. And I thought he could share a lot of value here to this audience. So, Frank, thank you. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me. Any chance to talk about local news, which I'm not sure everybody really understands what's happening. And every chance we get to amplify it and explain is a chance to improve it, save it even. Yep, I agree. So I kind of start every podcast the same. If you could just kind of, sure. We already kind of met last week. Just give a little background on your career, kind of what led you up to where you are now. Kind of set a baseline, yeah. Yeah, well, like where I am now is at the Asbury Park Press, as you mentioned, which is a long-standing, strong journalistic epicenter in New Jersey. It's been around for, over 100 years. It's well known in Jersey circles, and I've worked with many of their journalists one way or the other. And then about a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to join them as their investigations editor. My title is news director, but basically Phil Friedman, the editor, brought me on to do a deep dive journalism. That's been my world since I think for the last 25, 30 years. I figured that's the way I wanted to go. Enterprise, things that nobody knows about, not the commodity news coverage day to day, which is critical. But I like to go a little deeper using Oprah, FOIA, all those tools that can get you behind the scenes. And it's something that's being shortchanged in this day of, let's get page views in the digital world. So I was happy to be brought on. And so that's, as you say, I've been around decades. It does make me sound like Old Man Winter, but it's amazing how fast it went. People say you wake up one day and you're a reporter at some train car accident in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the next thing you know, you're being said, "Oh, he's been here for 5 decades." So anyway, I started Elizabeth, New Jersey, as a daily reporter. In what little trivia, the Elizabeth Daily Journal was the second longest publishing daily in America. And Paul, do you know what the first one was? You should. You may. Pressure.
Yeah, you put me under pressure. Like you said, it's early here in Colorado. I'll just name the biggest name I could think of. The New York Times? I don't know. I don't know.
It's actually the Hartford Courant.
Oh, okay. That makes sense once you say that. But
yeah. So the Daily Journal was second. It went out of business in 92, but I had about 5 years there as a daily reporter. And it really, as I tell people, I didn't want to do this. This was not my plan. Like some people wake up, they're in 8th grade and they're running their school newspaper and they know they wanted to be a newspaper reporter, editor since birth. I was going to write novels and screenplays. That's sort of what I developed in college, but I needed a job. And my Aunt Betty who read the Daily Journal religiously, called up my mother one day, who was worried about me in the attic, just typing all day. And then at night I was, waiting on tables or doing something like that. And she said, you should go down. They're looking for writers. So sure enough, in the classifieds, which hardly exist anymore, there was they wanted freelancers. And I did it. I went and covered a Scotch Plains Board of Education meeting, and I dictated it over the phone to some tremendous rewrite guy who made sense of my gibberish. And there was my name splashed across the paper the next day and banner headline. And pretty much took it from there. 2 weeks later, they offered me a job. I took the job, only going to stay for a year, pay off my college debts, buy a car, that kind of thing. And 45 years later, here I am. So I never left.
That's talking to people on this podcast. It's usually one of two things: either like their parents, the guy I had on yesterday, his parents met at a newspaper, like they're both journalists, and it goes back generations, or people just completely stumble and fall backwards into it. It's always one of those two, almost always one of those two things.
It's a weird world. But like I said, it was great. And I just fell into it. Then I always wanted to be a travel writer. So I got a job in New York with a B2B travel magazine, which was fun to travel around, but it wasn't real journalism. It was serving the vendors, the airlines and the cruise lines and the hotels. And they weren't really into me writing exposés about scams and things like that. So I lasted about 2 years there, but it was good. Then I went to Reuters Business and I covered Wall Street. So my second cataclysmic moment was the crash of '87. I happened to be at Reuters, and it was unprecedented. So back then, it dropped 500 points, and that was 20% of the market. So when people lose 500 points today, they get all excited. But think about losing 20% of the market. So I was there. That wasn't my cup of tea. And then that's when I segued over into editing. And I went back to my old paper, became the city editor of the Daily Journal, and really found my calling as an editor to help others, do better work using some of my knowledge. That parlayed into the Denver Post. And I know you had Kristen Go on recently, and she worked there. I actually hired Kristen, and she's done very well for herself, and her Cal project is great. And that was great. Then we ran into Columbine. So Columbine in 1999 was a horrific event, and I was the Metro editor or something like that. And so we went through that, and the staff earned a Pulitzer Prize for breaking news, which was impressive work by many and a tragedy. And, it was so emotional for over a year between the event and the announcement a year later. And then that catapulted me into my top editor job at the Bergen Record. And I was there for about 11 years. And a few minutes after I arrived there, it seemed like I didn't even unpack my boxes. We had the next horrific national event, 9/11, which was right across the river from Hackensack, where we were based. And from my window, we were watching the towers collapse, and people were crying. And it was, people who were around then remember how, unprecedented it was and how emotionally racking and scary and everything. And I stayed there for a while, 11 years actually, and then moved into a national role with Digital First Media. Then was McClatchy for 2 years covering, I was running a paper in Georgia, but I was doing it remotely because it was the product of COVID. Where you could run things from outer space if you wanted to. And then Asbury Park came calling, and I thought, well, this is a great way to wrap up my career. Hopefully this is my last stop doing the work I love in New Jersey, in a state that, demands attention to pretty much every piece of government, and it has everything here. So people say if you want to really enjoy your career, at one point you should work in New Jersey and you should work in Florida, where you can actually get records without anybody throwing them out the window and hiding them. Anyway, that's a brief synopsis. I probably went on too long, but it's hard to cover 45 years.
Yeah. That was actually kind of one of my next questions, and you touched on it briefly because we talked about it in our first call. That you were here in Denver, or I'm not in Denver, I'm in Colorado, but you're in Denver for Columbine, and then right across the river at 9/11, which is almost, I don't want to it's almost like this kind of Forrest Gump-esque like following of like these, I mean, terrible. It's not a lighthearted thing of terrible tragedies. I'm
No.
curious if you have any takeaways, because, all the national media obviously was all over both of those, but you just happen to be at a local publication for both of those like, defining moments.
Right.
Do you have any
Paul.
takeaways of being, in the community at a local publication versus everybody parachuting in and covering it also? I was curious about that personally.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because we really saw firsthand what happens. Denver was a sleepy town, a cow town, everybody called it, as you know.
Yep.
When I moved in the 90s, I thought I made a mistake because it was, you could park in downtown Denver next to the one bar that was open at night on a Friday night. And it was pretty, because it was a boom and bust city.
Yep.
But, by the mid 90s, things were really picking up. So a lot of news organizations had started setting up, so Fox put a TV station there, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Reuters, they all started putting bureaus in there, and it became pretty competitive. It was even more competitive. And the Rocky Mountain News was obviously opposite the Denver Post. And, two great newspapers just with great reporters and editors just going head to head every day. But then when Columbine happened, to watch the national and international, big names parachute in, as you said, it ratcheted up to another level that I hadn't experienced at that level. I had some experience in New York, going against NBC and ABC and all that. But to watch that, and the difference was, they had resources that we couldn't even dream about. And there were things being done that were really shocking to us in terms of getting witnesses and whatnot. What the aftermath was, is we were left there. Like when 2 weeks later, when it died down for real, we were the ones left. And there was a lot of anger and retribution that was still happening, and we were it. So the local media was there on the ground for the next year, or forever. So I would think that we had to be really mindful of the kind of work we did and what we did. You aren't going to see the heads of NBC, ABC, and CBS ever again, but you were going to see our reporters and editors on the streets. As you know, Denver's a pretty small, big town, or at least it was when I was there. So I thought that was it. And, fast forward to 9/11, a lot of the national, international media was in New York. So we were going, we were competing with them, and we were there. And we were a local publication. And New Jersey lost, plenty of people from the planes, from the towers, et cetera. So we were tightly wound with what was happening. It wasn't an out-of-body experience that we're like, well, we don't know these people, we have to parachute in. These were our people. So Middletown, New Jersey lost many people from Cantor Fitzgerald. The town I lived in, Glen Rock, New Jersey, lost 11 people because that was a big commuter town. There's 2 train lines, there's a bus line. So a lot of folks in Glen Rock went into there. And there was the church I had joined, St. Catherine's, they lost 10 of their parishioners. So that was really local. That was really impressive that we knew all these people. We knew a lot of them. And then we did bios of everybody in New Jersey who died. It was an all-out effort. We were able to do that because at the time we had, several hundred, we had at least 250 reporters and editors and photographers. So we had a huge staff. They really staffed that place well over the years. And so we were able to put 20 people on victims and talk to them and really get to their personal stories. So yeah, local news is where that gets done. 2 weeks later, we're still on the ground doing the work that, the national news was moving on to, let's invade the Mideast. We weren't talking about that from where we were. And then you had the anthrax scares. That was happening. That was a fallout. If you remember, we had a brave soul that volunteered to open the mail in one of our sheds in the corner. Sharon was great. Yeah, it was just, it was those two things happening within a year of each other, 2 years of each other, 99 to 01. Was really remarkable in my career. I have to say that.
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. And you're right how you were kind of left on the scene afterwards. I remember Columbine. I was in Denver. I was in 8th grade when Columbine happened. And, years later, I was going to school. I was going to college at Metro State down downtown Denver.
Sure.
And I had a guy in a classmate in a couple of my classes who's in a wheelchair, and he was shot in the back at Columbine. Like media wasn't covering that. It's just from my own personal experience. Years and years later, after they roll out, it's still like there in the community and everything.
Yeah. There was a lot of residual events that went on. Like I had just left, I left and came to New Jersey in, as I said, in January of 2001. And one of my city editor, Evan Dreyer, who's still in Denver doing various work, he had to sort of pick up the mantle. One of the things we did was we heard all these rumors about friendly fire injuring or killing the victims.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because obviously there was a lot of confusion. So we were suing to get records. And of course, that opened up many wounds in the community. I wasn't there, but Evan was there, and he had to, be the face of the person trying to get the records. And this was not a pleasant moment for him or the paper, but it was necessary for journalism to get to the bottom of what really happened. And then, of course, as you say, there were some tragedies that followed Columbine because of what happened. Families were torn apart, people were paralyzed, marriages broke up. It was just one, and that's what local news did. That's what we did. That's what the Rocky did. Yeah, that's critical to local news. That's the difference between, you talk to people now and they say, "Oh, there's plenty of news. I just pull up my phone and I got, news." But, that news is mostly national, international, and the stuff when you see, how did that guy on Channel 7 get that story about that mother who, has got 6 babies and she's driving a bus and all? Well, that was probably a local reporter who first got that, and it bubbles to the surface and it gets Googleized, and then CBS or somebody's national news says, "Hey, we should do that story." So think about all the stories that you see as a national, international level that really started with some shoe leather in some town in the United States. And those people are in short supply because of the landscape and what's happened. I'm sure you guys have talked about the numbers, but I was just going over them. Reading Audrey Cooper taking over the Baltimore Banner, one of the budding success stories in local journalism. They have about 100 journalists, they said now, which is a big number for a newsroom anymore. A big number. As I said, at the Record, we had 270 people at one point. And now if you have 100 people in your newsroom, in a local newsroom, you're sitting pretty. And that's just a rare. So I just read 136 papers in the United States closed last year alone. Just last year, newspapers.
Yep.
So we're fighting for survival and we're fighting for relevance, and it's such a battle. I've been doing it for 45 years, and I think the decline started the day I started. It just seems like we've always been climbing uphill for all these years with some bright, some moments where you get an extra 2 or 3 people on your staff or whatever, but mostly it's keep what you got and be happy. And when you lose them, you're wondering, how many am I going to lose? So I know it's a little depressing, but
yeah.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize, so you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
There's bright spots coming up and everything too. It's funny when you said, when people that aren't paying attention, aren't in journalism or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, there's plenty of news. I see this." There's this story I read years ago. It was Michael Crichton when he was writing Jurassic Park, the book, and he was like 10 or 14 months deep in heavy research on dinosaurs, obviously, and I saw this story about it. I know, I'll connect the dots here, I promise. And he saw some story from like a big publication about some dinosaur a fossil that was discovered in Wyoming or something.
Right.
And he was like, it's this funny thing that a trick my brain would do where I would read that story and I'd be like, this is riddled with errors. Wrong, 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 wrong. He's like, oh, they just missed the mark on that. He's like, and then I would go to the next story on the page and be like, oh, that's interesting, and believe like the next story he read. But when he had a depth on a topic,
subject,
he realized, oh, maybe they don't have the depth to do this everywhere, and that's kind of the value of local.
Well, that's
kind of a metaphor for it, yeah.
Yeah, it is. I thought you were going to say dinosaurs and Frank. I thought you were going to link those two.
No,
Frank, you've been around long enough. They had, actually, my first job, we had the early word processors we were writing on in 1980. That's when I started. And then I moved to this travel magazine, and I walked in. I was like so eager. I'm there like before even the secretaries came in, and I didn't realize how lax and how late in the day the travel business was, right? Which made sense. There's a lot of events at night. But there I am, and I said, well, why don't you go in the back and wait for the editor? And I go in the back, and there's this it looked like a detention center room, with this pale green paint, and I see typewriters, and I'm like, oh, this must be like the waiting room, and then the computers are in the next room, and no, we had typewriters. I went backwards for like 2 years, and then I zoomed to Reuters, and Reuters was like the space age with all the technology and equipment. And they had Quotrons on real-time Wall Street, and they had thousands of, phones and teletype. It was just, I'd been whipsawed back and forth into time. But the point about local news is, and we talked about the numbers, they're going down. But a big part of local news is not only the day-to-day coverage, but it's the in-depth, which Michael Crichton was referring to. And that's the big strain right now. Fortunately for us, Phil Friedman wanted, to really push deep dive journalism. And that's why we ended up together. And so I run a group, a small team, and we do deep dives. And I have to say, it changes the landscape of just putting in day-to-day stuff to get page views, which is a big thing now, right? So that everybody needs page views to get advertisers. And then there's this battle between, do we want page views or do we want subscribers? Which of course pay real money. Page views you can get it free, but the advertisers are picking up some of the battle. But subscriptions are really the holy grail of this whole thing. So we think deep dive journalism that you can't get anywhere else at the Jersey Shore, where we are, would be the answer. And so we've been pushing that. And just a couple of examples, we had a great investigative series with Michael Diamond and Mike Davis. We found out that the New Jersey state watchdog called us State Commission of Investigation, which is in charge of like rooting out waste, fraud, corruption, mob, the whole thing. I mean, this is this vaunted, cherished agency. We discovered pretty early on they were committing their own fraud and waste and problem. So we ended up finding out that the executive director had a full-time job doing that, was appointed very quietly after their former leader died in a car crash. But we found out that this person had a second job in another state and had a primary residence in a third state. So it wasn't a good situation. And we were able to do that because of our dedication to time and effort. I mean, that took, from the time we started writing it to the time we wrote the biggest story that exposed it, was 3 months. So, and then we went on and we did Lakewood, New Jersey, which is a very, very interesting township in New Jersey. It's the fastest growing municipality. It has all the problems you would think that something like that would have. And we just, we did some deep dive. Joe Strupp, the reporter, I put him on the case, and he's been just coming up with story after malfeasance and wrongdoing and overpaying and financial, question. That's the work that we really value, and I think our readers really value. So we need to sustain that. We need to spread that. In addition to day-to-day coverage of ICE raids, which we just did today, there was a series of ICE raids that nobody knew about because the local police are not told about it. The ICE agents just come in and do their thing. And then we had a reporter, Olivia Liu, who's on the scene and interviewed people at a convenience store who said, they just went over and grabbed him out of his car and put him away and took him. Nobody knows who it was, where it was. Local officials didn't know. That's local news, right? We're on the ground. We're talking to people. If we don't do that across the country, we've got these news deserts that everybody knows about.
Yep.
I don't know how these places where they don't have that kind of robust reporting, how they function, right? Who's watching City Hall? Who's watching where your money's going? If your tax dollars aren't going to what you think they're going to, then you should know about that, right? And you should have a say in how do you change. That's what we do. We follow the money. There's plenty of places nobody's watching City Hall. Plenty of places.
Yeah. I can't remember if I was reading this or if I was talking to somebody. Somebody I was listening to or reading referenced this study that showed, I think the case they were making is for local, just to support local news outlets. And the study said that in news desert, like communities with news deserts, that they actually, the amount of money they lose due to corruption when a news source goes out of business is actually greater than if they had just subsidized keeping like the news publication in business. I don't know if I phrased that correctly. There's something along those lines.
Right.
And then when you were talking about City Hall, I just had a guy on the podcast maybe a couple weeks ago, Michael Phillips. He has a startup in Richmond called The Richmonder.
Okay.
And he was working at the bigger like Daily in Richmond.
Times Dispatch.
Yeah. And he left and he said nobody was going to the city council meetings. Nobody. Yeah. He said they went one day and to one meeting and pointed out some of the stuff that was going on, these ridiculously long budget things going out. He's like, the next meeting, there were 8 reporters from 5 publications there because just nobody was there. It was a really good example of him like, yeah, why isn't anybody doing this? And they showed up and then more people showed up. So that's the importance I think a lot of the general public doesn't think about with like local journalism. No. You know, I got plenty of news on my phone.
No, but they don't know what's going on in their backyards. We did a great experiment for Sunshine Week, which is the first week in April. That is a national news effort. And it's really to find out, it's a deep dive, but it's to shine the light, right, on what's happening. So newspapers try to coordinate and do some kind of deep dive project. And when I was at the Journal News, which is a Gannett, which is now called USA Today Network, Inc. But at the time, so this is in Westchester, Rockland County, New York, you know, just above New York City, for those who don't know the geography. And we got 3 citizens and we paired them with 3 reporters. And we said, what do you want to know? What things are on your mind that you really want to know? And we'll walk you through the open records request process. We will be with you. We will help you write the Oprah. We will be there. And then we will write about it. And then these 3 citizens, I still have it on my door and I pinned the front page onto my door in Asbury. And these three citizens had some great questions. They thought, oh, this won't be hard. And through this process, which took weeks, maybe months, they never got what they wanted. They were told, like in one case, this person wanted to know about a railroad, accidents from this one freight railroad that carried all kinds of stuff through their neighborhood. They wanted to know how many accidents there'd been and what they were. Seems pretty simple, right? So they put in the Oprah to the agency and they got back, we don't have anything. Nothing happened. The next thing we did is we showed them the 5 or 6 news stories that we plucked from our archives that said, well, what about these? We were there. We have pictures. And they were like, oh, we don't, and this went back and forth. And so the lesson to the audience, to the Joes and Janes of the world was, you just can't get this information. And they were so frustrated. They had jobs. They didn't have time to do this, which is what we do. Right? Because you got to go to work, you got to feed your kids, you got to pay the mortgage, you got to fix your house, you got to paint the house, you got to get the car repaired, all those things that take up your time. We're your eyes and ears for that. So that's what we take pride in. What do you want to know? We'll try to find out. I have multiple Oprahs out right now in FOIAs that I'm trying to find out how many ICE agents are in New Jersey. So they recognized it. They said, we're working on it. We need an extension. So that's next week. I want to know how many, guns were taken off the streets at the New Jersey Turnpike in a certain period, right? Because that's called the Iron Highway or the Cocaine Highway, whatever 95 or the New Jersey Turnpike, whatever you're transporting, it goes up there. So I'm waiting to hear about that. So that takes weeks and months, and you have to stay on top of it. And I'm pretty sure that your average citizen doesn't have that, forget about skill and knowledge, but just even time and energy. So that's, again, another example of why local news can get it done. And you can call. Like, people call me up all the time or send emails and say, hey, can you look at this? Can you look at that? And when I get one of those, I love it. If maybe 1 in 5 turns out to be something, great. Sometimes it's a rumor. and then we debunk it. But without those eyes and ears of everybody else, we're also out of luck because we just don't have enough people to be in. I mean, New Jersey has 566 towns. There's 630 something school districts. There's just not that many journalists to cover all those places.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Real quick, I'm not a journalist. Most people listening to this are, but you said, what's an Oprah? You said it a few times. I know what a FOIA is, the Freedom of Information.
Same thing. It's a state.
Same thing. Okay.
Yeah, it's the Open Public Records Act. So
I thought it was something like that. I just wasn't familiar with the term.
Yeah, sorry. And you go to New York and it's FOIA. You come to New Jersey, it's Oprah.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it's the same thing. Most states have some form of public records. Now, as I said earlier in the show, Florida, I'm told, you can get anything, which is great. I mean, everybody who works there said it's no. In New Jersey, I'm sorry to all those who are Oprah custodians, it is not that easy. In fact, they have an appeals process that they put in place with a government records council. So if you can't get what you want and you've written letters, you got your lawyer involved, then you go to this council, and that has its flaws as well. So adjudication does not happen overnight. That's for sure. And you need lawyer, and then there's laws in New Jersey that have been repealed. There's been an attack on transparency in New Jersey. It's been a hot topic. The Governor Murphy, who just left, was very defensive when Nancy Solomon from WNYC, our public radio, grilled him on it. Very upset when he got like a C or a D grade on transparency. But all you got to do is look at what's been happening on that front. And it's a constant battle to a weakened press, right? So let's just keep, anybody who, anyway, I've got opinions that I'm not going to share here.
That's fine.
But it's a battle. It's a battle every day. And I'm personally concerned that when my generation exits stage left, what's left?
Right.
It's a big wave of people. Kristen Go said she thought she was the only person left who only had a job in journalism. And I want Kristen to know that it's at least me and her.
I'm gonna let her know that this one's coming out since you said you hired her and you remembered her from way back when. I'll let her know. I'm sure she'll be listening. Yeah.
I'm so happy to see what she's doing there, really. I mean, she's California, gal, and she's really making some waves out there with that operation. So
yeah, it's a really cool project.
Really good.
Shameless self-promotion. Go listen to that episode if you're listening to this one. Go back and listen to the Kristen Go one from a little
you'll
while
learn
back.
a lot, especially if you're in California, which could use about 5 million more reporters.
Yeah, it's basically its own country. Real quick, we're running up on time in a minute here, but you talked a few times just about how many newspapers closed, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I've covered it a million times on this show, and the industry kind of declining. But you and I, kind of similar to that, in our first conversation, we talked about this thing that's come up recently on the show is how local publishers failed at digital. And I had a guy on who was at Google, and he's like, "That's not true. They were under-resourced from the get-go." But can you give me your take on what did go wrong since you've been there since pre-internet and everything up till today? What's wrong? What was misunderstood, et cetera? Yeah.
I think a lot was misunderstood because the industry was what it was, right? It was a print thing. It took time. It had a whole business model to it, and that worked for so long. And then this digital age came along, and I remember people say, "Oh, this is not going to last." And newspapers will always be around. And I remember a prominent New York City columnist who spoke at one of our dinners, press dinners. He's holding up the paper and he said, this is what you do when you stand and you're making, when a citizen is making a point at a meeting, he's holding up a newspaper. He's not going to be holding up his computer and saying, this. And so it was just a metaphor for how wrong we could be. Again, I think the first thing I remember what we did is everything was put up for free. There was no paywall. There was no talk about paying for it. For a lot of papers, that's what they did. They just said, well, we have to put it on this platform. Then it was, do you put it up before or after it goes in print? And then there was that. So, we were already shrinking. And I know newsrooms, like I think the Washington Post had a digital room and a print room. And people realized, well, you need more people to do two separate platforms, if you will. But then that wasn't successful. Then everybody said, well, we don't know what that guy's doing. So there was so much discord. And of course, it's a bunch of fiefdoms. It's not one industry. It's not like the car industry with us, 3 major car makers. And we had hundreds and thousands of newsrooms across the country trying to figure this out. And I clearly think we missed the mark. And yes, we probably were under-resourced, but we probably didn't have enough people in the right spot who understood digital, who understood what was happening on the tech world. And then there was a lot of people probably said, well, I'm not doing that. I mean, it was a hard thing to transition to. I transitioned. The Bergen Record was in the beginning, so it's 2001 when I'm there, and we were just really getting ramped up. I mean, the website at the time was a marketing tool. It wasn't a news facility. It was a way to market things.
Right.
And so I remember the staff there that was very good was coming into me and saying, listen, our leader doesn't want us talking to you. He doesn't want anything to do with you. But we know that this is where it's going. So there were some very smart people. A guy named Sean Oates, who's still with USA Today, was my guy helping me through all that. I mean, we were building this website. And then Twitter came along, right? Who knew what was a Twitter?
Right.
What was that? It was the antithesis of what we did. Let's just put out a bunch of characters, like one line and say, here's this. And so we brought in a really smart person who I found and, from friends. And so she came in and she taught the newsroom about Twitter, so we had people coming in to just bring us into Facebook land and Twitter land. And so all this is going on while this world is changing around us. It was a lot. So I can't lay blame at anybody's feet, but it was a lot. And there was really smart people and, and then there was pay, so people who knew this stuff were getting paid way more to do for private business or tech. It's hard to come into the newspaper world and our salaries are not in that stratosphere except if you're at the very top, right? So then there's the whole issue of supporting a family on a newspaper salary. That's never been disputed. Most people will say it's tough to, match it. I mean, my friends were business majors in college and, they had houses and cars and babies. And I was still like, I rented an apartment for $200 a month where it didn't have a bell and I had a string that went down and you had to pull it and I had bells attached to it. To me, it was bon vivant kind of lifestyle, but it wasn't a lot of money to be made in that. And so there was all those factors going in there. And then this thing took off like a jet and everybody's scrambling. And the business model today is not as robust as it used to be, right? So it's hard to make money in the business. I remember one guy when I said, well, why don't you, when I said at the Record, I said, why don't you advertise on our website? And he said, well, because it doesn't work. He said, I've read studies that said that people read an ad on your laptop. It's not as effective as if it's in the paper. So I'm not going to spend that money. Again, there's 1,000 studies. There's 1,000 reasons. I think we've adopted the new technology. So there's some super smart people who really know their stuff. And that's why I think at the end of the day, I am optimistic because I see the Baltimore Banner. I see ProPublica. I see these, tap intos that are trying, they're small and we have to scale it. We have to scale it and we have to get people interested coming out of either journalism school or wherever. I had a great reporter who came it was a second career for her, and she wanted to study climate change. So she went to Northwestern, got a degree. She's, 10 years into her professional world, and she lands in Columbus, Georgia at the paper. And she's a climate. And so we worked together, and I'd like to think we got some great stuff out. She's learned the business. She's really good. Kayla Hunter, if you're listening, Kayla. She's doing great. She's in Atlanta now, still working for the paper, but she's branched out and she's really good at getting records. She's really learning that world. And that's what we need, more and more people who really want to protect democracy. I mean, we're going to get into that part of it. Is without us, democracy goes backwards. If you don't know what your government is doing, If you can't find that out, if you can't find out who's making the money, your tax money, then how do you operate? How do you?
Yep.
We just did a story on police chief salaries in Ocean County, New Jersey. It was a great job by Jean Mickle, veteran reporter, and she had to Oprah everybody's contract in every town in Ocean County. And then we got into it and we showed people, what does your chief make and what's your pension? I'm not denigrating that. I'm saying that's what you should know, and it should be an open format to say, this is what we're paying this person, and this is what we're paying this whole department, and this is what if we're buying trucks for town because we have the money, maybe the town should tell the people, listen, we're going to spend $5 million buying trucks and cars next year. You guys good with that? And here's what we need it for. But that's not readily available. That's a battle day in and day out. But it's how we're a democracy. It's how New Jersey is a very expensive place to live. I'm not saying Denver isn't, but New Jersey is expensive. It's one of the highest real estate places. Middle income folks trying to make a living, trying to start a family. I mean, $500,000 house is in North Jersey. That's not easy. So if I make my money, I want to know where it goes. If I'm paying $10,000 in property tax, I want to know where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's all about. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Getting over this cold still. That's really well said. Good stuff. That's why it's so important and great stuff. I might be biased. Maybe I'm optimistic, and I spend my days in the weeds in this stuff of like business models and local news. I see a lot of things to be optimistic about too. Even like little startups popping up in news deserts and stuff. I think my opinion is that with technology getting better and better, it's going to allow leaner teams to do higher quality journalism and outsource a lot of the back end stuff like that. But that's all to be seen still. But I agree with you. It's very important, all that. We have come up on time. I have to get on another meeting in just a minute here. I wish we could keep talking. But Frank, where can people find you, like online? What do you want me to link to? I'll link to Asbury Park Press and
the Asbury Park Press to see my colleagues' work, Paul.
Okay.
And I'm at LinkedIn. I'm easily found on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Frank Scandale there. That's where I post a lot of the work we do, pretty much all the work we do. I'm sort of in and out on Instagram, but that's more of a distraction. That's not
Me too.
It's not a vehicle. Yeah, but no, I think LinkedIn is where you find me. I've done a blog. I'm thinking about a Substack, at some point when I retire. My former colleague, Dave Wilson, was at the Journal News and one of the best investigative reporters around. He recently took a buyout, but then the next day, I think he started a Substack, and he's doing great. He's doing the same work, and you as a reader. So to your point, that's where I'm optimistic. When somebody like Dave Wilson has been doing this as long as I have, still has the enthusiasm, and maybe he'll inspire somebody else, and he gives talks just to get the next generation or two grounded in this and understanding the fundamentals. You can't just, you got to verify everything. You can't just write it, and that's the problem with so much discourse now is there's rumors and people repeat stuff, and where's the sourcing on it? Like I try to tell my kids when they read something, I say, well, where'd you get it? Who wrote it? What's the news source? And just because it's there doesn't mean it's true. And that's what a real journalist does, whether it's, a tap into one-man band or a large newspaper. It has to be verifiable. The facts have to be as best we can. Again, we don't always get it 100% right, like Michael Crichton said, but we'll fix it. If somebody calls and said, it's not true, it's not 5 million, it's 18 million, and you conflated this, then we fix that. But I really appreciate the opportunity, Paul, to do this anytime. And I think it's a great platform, what you have going here, to share this and get it out. And once it's out, I'll share it with my group on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. I'm on there a lot too. I'll link to all that stuff. So if you're listening, you can just scroll down and click and find Frank there. So Frank, thank you so much. Hope you have a great weekend. It's Friday. Have a good weekend.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Right. Yep.
So long.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.